think that the question was basically focusing, coming from Ryan, on what are community-based alternatives that don't have an over-reliance on the state. And then I think Barbara was building on that question to ask, how can we have a balanced, nuanced critique that takes into account that, you know, the state is repressive, but also that we need to hold the state accountable for not abandoning our communities and the people who live within them. And so how can we do that?
Don't require that public resources force organizations, groups, community responses to work exclusively or even rely mostly on the legal system, on the criminal legal system. I mean, I think that's like one piece. And I know folks have alluded to VAWA a couple of times here, but Beth talks about this in her book as well, that, you know, VAWA was initially brought up by then Senator Biden as a standalone bill and just didn't get any support until it was included as part of an omnibus crime legislation, which included lots of pieces that a lot of feminists did not agree with, you know, and that it was one of the big compromises that was made. And, you know, as a result, the VAWA got deeply associated with the larger kind of, you know, in prison industrial complex in that way. And has subsequently, and for those of you who don't know what the Violence Against Women Act does, I mean, it provides resources and programming for law enforcement, like training and financial resources for them to respond to violence against women, but then also provides support for services in the community. Our organizations like RVA get funding through the Violence Against Women Act. But one of the primary critiques of the Violence Against Women Act has been that it has been law enforcement guided. And so those are public resources that are basically saying, you people who are responding to violence against women, gender-based violence, you need to utilize the criminal legal system, even like the U visa as a remedy for folks who are immigrants here. And that also requires that you are cooperating with law enforcement in a substantive way. I mean, there are many ways in which those restrictions are placed around the funds that are available that really limit things. And I think it's interesting that just recently there was a call for proposals for federal funding for culturally sensitive services around violence against women for African American communities. And in the call, it specifically said you do not have to work with the criminal legal system. And I thought that was really interesting. And part of the backstory of that was that people weren't applying for the funding. And why weren't they applying? Because they were working with Black communities that did not want to be working with, because of the ways in which they had been oppressed and victimized by the criminal legal system, didn't want to work with them. And the only way anyone was going to apply for any of that funding was to make it very clear that they didn't have to do that. So, short answer, don't require it.
I would also just add one thing, which is, you know, right now, this exact moment, within this week, a bunch of our legislators in the House of Representatives in Illinois are about to override the governor's veto of funding for several prisons that he has slated for being closed in the state, okay? So he's made a recommendation that Dwight be closed, that the two IYC Murfreesboro, IYC Joliet be closed, and that TAMS, most importantly, in my opinion, you know, not most importantly, but very importantly, that TAMS be closed. A place where it's $200,000 a year to incarcerate a person in that torture cell for 23 hours a day, okay? This is going on right here. How many of you knew this? Okay, you did. How many of you have called your representative to tell them to vote, basically to vote no on the override, right? Very few people. Now, the other part of that, which I want to speak to, which is the Ryan point, which is, so these places are going to be closed, millions of dollars saved, apparently, in 2013, something like $75 million saved, or something like that, a huge number. How many in our communities are insisting that those funds be rediverted into our community-based alternatives in our communities? Almost no one, because hardly anyone knows what the hell's going on in Springfield, right? And so that is a direct opportunity right this instant to force them, as they write the budget next time, to take that money that's been diverted and bring it back into our neighborhoods and funnel where that needs to be. It's happening, you're working on this at Cook County right now for the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. You know, okay, fine, shut that place down, but redirect the funds into the places that we need. That's where we hold the state accountable. It's to say we want it in our schools, we want it in these other places. What is the governor using right now as his pitch to force people to care? Is to say that it's going to go to DCFS. Okay? That is, you know, and because DCFS has been super defunded, right? So in a way, if you want to talk about children in the state, the only way people understand that writ large is to say, if we take these monies from the prisons, more money will go to DCFS. Well, all of us in here who know anything know that DCFS is its own prison, okay, for young people of color. And so we don't want it to go to DCFS writ large. We want it to go to XYZ, but no one is identifying what those XYZs are. We're not engaged. No one is making a phone call. So I insist that, you know, you go on Monday and Tuesday, and then you pick up the phone and you find out who your rep is, and you tell them, vote no on the override, right? That is a way of holding the system accountable and then also forcing them to give us the money back, not to take it and divert it to some Neverland to give more money to the police, right? So this is where we have a direct opportunity. We need to be paying attention to that. If you have never been to Springfield during a session, you should be ashamed of yourself, right? You should be ashamed. Why? Because you need to know what the hell's going on over there. You'd be shocked the way they talk about our children. You would be shocked. Even people who think they wouldn't be shocked, you'd be shocked the way they talk about your children as a bunch of hoodlum savages that need more 3 strikes laws passed like this under your breath. You don't know what's going on. And then we shocked. We sit back going, how's this happening? Why are all these cops showing up in Inglewood, right? So I feel very much like I'm impatient now with us, you know? I really am. Like, I usually try to be like, I try to pretend I'm understanding. My friends know I'm not. They know I really think that most people are super lazy, right? When they can do something very simple, and we keep saying, we give people simple instructions. You have a simple instruction to call. If you all don't call, I will find you, and I will kill you. So
in a nonviolent way.
That's it. That's the way to do it, right? That's the way. That's how you motivate people. You threaten to kill them. Anti-violence work.
She has the sign-in sheet.
All right. That's going to really make asking people to give us their emails super awkward. Thank you, Miriam.
People be signing out at the end. Like,
I know. God, we promise not to share any of your information with Miriam Cava. Unless you don't call.
I just want to make a. I mean, I'm further away from the day-to-day work of this issue than my sisters on the panel. But one of the critiques that I had early on that I think still holds true is we don't have good coalitions. And we still are operating in these segregated spaces. And so the sexual assault, domestic violence work is still in many ways, and not just here in Chicago, but in many ways still very segregated from our communities. We don't build those relationships. Somehow we're still afraid that we're going to lose momentum on this issue if we somehow collude with the prison industrial conversations. And so I think it's really incumbent upon us who are in communities, and I agree with what you're saying, but I also take issue with what you're saying, because I really think that we haven't done a really good job of building those relationships across our movement. And I think the greatest perpetuator of that, in my experience, was the sexual assault movement. We were isolated from the communities. We weren't in the communities. We weren't in conversations with people in the communities. And we were really afraid that this issue was somehow going to be overshadowed by all these other issues. We have to get way beyond that. We have to go far, far away. And I think this is a good opportunity to realize we're the only ones that can have the conversation. If we're not having the conversations, if we're not talking, if we're not taking it to whatever communities we find, somebody else is going to take it to those communities, and we're going to lose out on this opportunity. So I left many years ago because I felt like there was very limited spaces to really bridge those relationships. And I don't think we're that far advanced of that many years later. And so I think it's time to sort of think about, we need to enter the room not afraid that somebody else is going to steal our issue, because it's going to continue to exist if we don't take it back.